We gave your wedding fund to your sister. She deserves a real wedding." Dad said it like he was proud. I didn't cry. I just looked at my fiancé. He stood up, pulled out his phone, and said, "Should I tell them what I do for a living?" My sister's smile disappeared. "My name is Jessica Mitchell, and for 23 years, I'd been the family disappointment. The daughter who went to community college instead of Northwestern. The one who chose graphic design over corporate success. The one whose fiancé was just some guy who worked in tech while my sister Sarah was marrying into the Morrison family fortune. What my parents didn't know was that Ryan, my quiet, humble fiancé, who drove a 10-year-old Honda and wore jeans to family dinners, was actually the CEO of Cloud Vault Solutions, a cybersecurity company worth $47 million. He'd been hiding his success for 2 years, wanting to make sure I loved him for who he was, not what he was worth. But when Dad announced they'd given my $10,000 wedding fund to Sarah because she deserved a real wedding, Ryan decided it was time for some truth. What happened next would destroy Sarah's perfect plans, expose our parents' favoritism, and prove that sometimes the underestimated child wins in the end. Because my sister thought she was marrying up into wealth and status, she had no idea her little sister was already there. What Ryan revealed about his company in the next 5 minutes would completely shatter my family's understanding of success, wealth, and who really deserved respect. The silence in our living room was deafening after Ryan's question. Mom sat frozen on the couch, her coffee mug halfway to her lips. Dad's triumphant expression was melting into confusion. Sarah, who'd been practically glowing with satisfaction about receiving my wedding fund, now looked uncertain, her eyes darting between Ryan and me. Ryan scrolled through his phone with deliberate calm, his face showing none of the anger I felt burning in my chest. After 2 years together, I knew this expression. It was the same focused intensity he brought to business negotiations, the quiet confidence of someone who held all the cards and was deciding exactly how to play them. "Jessica," he said, his voice steady, "do you remember when I told you I preferred to keep my work life private until we were serious about our future together?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. I knew Ryan was successful. His apartment was too nice, his casual spending too easy, his confidence too genuine for someone struggling financially. But he'd always deflected questions about specifics, saying he wanted our relationship to be about us, not his career. What Ryan showed us next would prove that my family had been completely wrong about everything. He turned his phone screen toward my parents, displaying what looked like a business website. "Cloud Vault Solutions," he said simply. "Cybersecurity and data protection for Fortune 500. Companies. I founded it 4 years ago." Dad leaned forward, squinting at the screen. That's very nice, Ryan. Small tech companies can be quite profitable these days." Ryan's smile was patient but sharp. "Not small, sir. We employ 237 people across 6 offices. Our annual revenue last year was $47 million. The numbers hit the room like physical blows. Mom's coffee mug actually slipped from her fingers, landing on the carpet with a soft thud that seemed thunderously loud in the silence. $47 million? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "That's just revenue," Ryan clarified, still scrolling through his phone. "The company's current market valuation is approximately $120 million. We're preparing for an IPO next year that should push that considerably higher." The revelation that would make my parents realize they'd been favoring the wrong daughter. Dad's face was cycling through several colors, red, white, then a sickly gray. "You're saying you're the CEO of a $120 million company?" "I'm saying I'm the founder and CEO of a company that provides cybersecurity services to 60% of the Fortune 500, including Henderson Global, where Sarah works, and Morrison Financial, where Bradley's family has their accounts." Sarah's face went white at the mention of her company. "You work with Henderson Global?" Ryan nodded. "We handle all their data protection and cybersecurity auditing. Excellent company, very forward-thinking leadership. I've worked directly with several of their executives, including the marketing department. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Ryan wasn't just successful. He was successful at the level where he regularly interacted with people at Sarah's company who were far above her in the corporate hierarchy. If you're loving this moment where the tables completely turn, hit that like button right now, because what Ryan reveals next about Jessica's wedding will leave this family absolutely speechless. Mom found her voice first. Why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were just some tech worker? Ryan's expression softened slightly as he looked at me. Because I wanted Jessica to love me for who I am, not what I'm worth. I've dated women who saw dollar signs instead of a person. With Jessica, I found someone who chose me when she thought I was nobody special. But you're not nobody special, Dad protested weakly. You're incredibly successful. I'm exactly the same person I was 5 minutes ago, Ryan interrupted. The only thing that's changed is your perception of me based on financial information. Sarah finally found her voice, though it came out strained. Jessica, did you know? I shook my head. I knew he was doing well, but not this well. I've been planning to tell the family after our engagement announcement, Xiao, Ryan continued, but given today's conversation about who deserves what kind of wedding, I thought it might be relevant information. What Ryan said next would completely reverse the power dynamic in our family. Speaking of weddings, Ryan said, pulling up another screen on his phone, I should probably mention that I've been working with a wedding planner for the past month. I wanted to surprise Jessica with some options for our celebration. He turned the phone toward me and I gasped. The screen showed images of the most beautiful wedding venue I'd ever seen. Rolling hills, vineyard views, elegant architecture that looked like something from a fairy tale. Chateau Margaux Vineyards in Napa Valley, Ryan explained. I've provisionally booked it for next September. The package includes accommodation for 50 guests, full catering service, flowers, photography, and entertainment. The total cost is $78,000, which I've already placed in escrow. Mom actually made a choking sound. $78,000? That seemed reasonable for the wedding Jessica deserves, Ryan said, his tone carefully neutral. Though if she prefers something smaller or larger, we can certainly adjust. Money isn't a constraint. Dad was staring at Ryan like he was seeing him for the first time, which in a way he was. Ryan, Dad said slowly, I owe you an apology. We haven't shown you the respect you deserve. But Ryan's response would prove he understood exactly what kind of people my parents really were. Sir, with respect, you haven't shown me anything different than you've shown Jessica for her entire life. The only difference is now, you know I have money. The comment landed like a slap. Dad's face flushed red. That's not true. We love both our daughters equally. Do you? Ryan asked. Because from where I'm sitting, you just took Jessica's wedding fund and gave it to Sarah because you decided Sarah's marriage was more valuable. What changed in the last 5 minutes to make you apologize to me, but not to your daughter? The question hung in the air, unanswered, because there was no good answer. Sarah, who'd been silent through most of this exchange, finally spoke up. Jessica, I didn't know about Ryan's situation when I accepted the money. Would it have mattered? I asked quietly. If you'd known Ryan could afford our wedding, would you have refused to take my fund? Sarah hesitated just a moment too long before answering, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. The moment when Sarah revealed her true character by refusing to give back money she knew was stolen. I mean, Sarah said clearly struggling, the money was already allocated to my wedding. I've made commitments to vendors, signed contracts. Sarah, Ryan said, his voice taking on the edge I'd heard him use in business calls. Are you saying you're keeping money that was promised to your sister, even now that you know she was wrongly denied it? It's not that simple, Sarah protested. Bradley's family is expecting a certain level of event. There are reputations involved, social expectations. Reputations, Ryan repeated flatly. Social expectations. You wouldn't understand, Sarah said, her defensive tone making her sound petulant. You come from money. You don't know what it's like to have to prove yourself in those circles. Ryan's laugh was cold. Sarah, I grew up in a trailer park in Ohio. My mom cleaned offices at night to pay rent. I understand exactly what it's like to feel like you don't belong in wealthy social circles. The revelation about Ryan's background would expose the shallow assumptions my family had been making. The difference, Ryan continued, is that I earned my way into those circles instead of stealing my way there, and I learned that the people worth impressing don't judge you based on how much you spend on a wedding. Sarah's face was getting redder. I'm not stealing anything. Mom and Dad made a decision about how to allocate family resources. They made a decision to break a promise to one daughter in order to fund another daughter's social ambitions, Ryan corrected. There's a word for that. Mom finally found her voice again. Ryan, please. We're family. Surely we can work this out without making it sound so harsh. Mrs. Mitchell, you're absolutely right that we should work this out as family. The question is whether you're going to treat Jessica like family or continue treating her like the child whose dreams matter less than Sarah's social status. What Mom said next would prove that finding out about Ryan's wealth hadn't actually changed her priorities. It's not about whose dreams matter more, Mom said defensively. It's about being practical. Sarah's wedding is next month. Everything is already planned and deposits are paid. Jessica and Ryan have time to plan properly, and clearly money isn't an issue for them. So because Ryan can afford to give Jessica the wedding she deserves, that means she shouldn't receive the family support that was promised to her? I asked. Mom's expression showed she was realizing how her logic sounded when stated plainly, but she pushed forward anyway. I'm saying we should be practical about family resources. Practical, Ryan repeated. You want to talk about practical family resource allocation? He pulled up another screen on his phone. I was planning to wait until after our wedding to discuss this, but let me tell you about my plans for supporting Jessica's family. What Ryan revealed next about his plans for my family would make their favoritism even more painful. I've been setting aside money to pay off your mortgage, Mrs. Mitchell. The full balance, approximately $87,000. I was going to present it as a wedding gift to Jessica, since family is so important to her. Mom's eyes went wide. You were going to pay off our mortgage? I was also planning to fund college accounts for any future grandchildren, regardless of which daughter they belonged to. And I had planned to invest in Mr. Mitchell's business expansion plans. Jessica mentioned you've been wanting to open a second location but haven't had the capital. Dad looked like he might faint. You would do all that? I would have done all that, Ryan corrected, past tense, because I was operating under the assumption that I was joining a family that loved and supported Jessica. Instead, I've learned that I'm joining a family that sees her as disposable when more favored children have needs. The reversal of fortune that would make my parents realize what their favoritism had cost them. That's not fair, Sarah protested. You can't hold the family hostage with money. I'm not holding anyone hostage, Ryan replied calmly. I'm simply choosing not to financially reward people who mistreat my fiancé. That seems like a reasonable boundary. But we're not mistreating Jessica, Dad said weakly. Aren't you? Ryan asked. You promised her a wedding fund, then gave it to her sister because you decided she was more deserving. You've spent this entire afternoon explaining why Jessica's wedding matters less than Sarah's. How exactly would you define mistreatment? The silence that followed was filled with the weight of years of favoritism being exposed and examined in harsh light. Sarah, meanwhile, was looking increasingly panicked. Jessica, surely you understand that I can't just give the money back now. I've already paid deposits, made commitments. How much have you actually spent? I asked. Sarah hesitated. Well, I've put down deposits. How much, Sarah? about $1,500 in deposits. The admission that Sarah had spent almost none of the money made her refusal to return it even more callous. So you're keeping $8,500 that belongs to your sister because returning it would be inconvenient, Ryan summarized. It's not about convenience, Sarah snapped. It's about what's fair. I've been planning this wedding for months. I've made commitments to Bradley's family about the kind of event we're having. Commitments based on money that was never yours, I said quietly. Mom and Dad gave it to me. That makes it mine. Ryan stood up, his movement sudden enough that everyone else in the room tensed. I think, he said carefully, that I've heard enough about your family's values. Jessica, are you ready to go home? The moment when Ryan decided our family wasn't worth his investment after all. Ryan, wait, Dad said urgently. Please don't leave like this. We can discuss this reasonably. Mr. Mitchell, I've been listening to reasonable discussion for the past hour. What I've learned is that your family operates on a system where Jessica's needs come second to Sarah's wants. That's not a system I'm interested in supporting financially or otherwise. Mom was starting to cry. Please don't punish the whole family because of one disagreement. This isn't punishment, Ryan replied. This is simply me choosing not to reward behavior that hurts the woman I love. Jessica deserves a family that celebrates her happiness instead of viewing it as less important than her sister's social aspirations. If this family meltdown has you completely hooked, smash that subscribe button because what happens when Sarah's wedding plans start falling apart is absolutely incredible. Sarah was looking increasingly desperate as the reality of the situation sank in. Jessica, you can't seriously be okay with this. You're letting money come between our family. I'm not the one who let money come between our family, I replied. You are. The moment you decided you deserved my wedding fund more than I did. But now it doesn't matter. Ryan can afford anything you want. It matters because it shows what you think of me. Whether Ryan has money or not, you thought it was acceptable to take something that was promised to me. Ryan put his hand on my shoulder. Jessica, I think it's time to go. We have a wedding to plan, and I'd prefer to do it with people who are excited about our happiness. As we gathered our things to leave, Mom made one final desperate attempt. Jessica, please, don't let this ruin our family over money. I stopped at the door and turned back to look at her. Mom, this was never about money. This was about showing me once again that Sarah's happiness matters more to you than mine. The only difference is that now there are consequences for that choice. What happened when we left would set in motion the complete collapse of Sarah's perfect wedding plans. As we drove away from my parents' house, Ryan was unusually quiet. Finally, he spoke. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Are you sorry you revealed who you really are? I asked. Ryan considered the question. No, I'm sorry it was necessary. I'd hoped that when I eventually told your family about my success, it would be a celebration. Instead, it became a weapon. Do you regret the things you said? About the mortgage? About my dad's business? I regret that I ever thought those people deserved my help, Ryan said firmly. But I don't regret standing up for you. Jessica, you're worth more than they've ever recognized, and it's time they learned that. 3 days later, the consequences of Ryan's revelation began to unfold in ways none of us had expected. The first call came from Sarah on Tuesday morning. Her voice was strained, panicked in a way I'd never heard before. Jessica, we need to talk. Something terrible has happened. What's wrong? The venue doubled their price. They said there was a miscommunication about the package rate, and now they want $20,000 instead of $10,000. Bradley's parents are furious, and they're talking about pulling their financial support. I felt a stab of sympathy despite everything. Sarah, that's awful. What are you going to do? I don't know. We don't have an extra $10,000, and that's not even the worst part. The domino effect that would prove my parents had chosen to support the wrong daughter. What's the worst part? Bradley's been asking questions about our family's financial situation. After meeting Ryan, He's wondering why I needed to take your wedding fund if our family is successful enough to have connections to someone like him. The irony wasn't lost on me. Bradley's family had been impressed by Ryan's success, assuming it reflected well on our entire family. Now that they knew the truth, that my parents had essentially robbed me to fund Sarah's wedding, they were questioning whether the Mitchell family was the kind of people they wanted to be associated with. "Sarah, what did you tell him?" I tried to explain that it was complicated, that the money was reallocated for practical reasons, but his mother asked me point blank whether we had stolen money from you to pay for our wedding. The moment when Sarah's lies began to catch up with her. "And what did you say?" I said it wasn't stolen, it was a family decision. But Jessica, Mrs. Morrison knows Ryan professionally. She called him to clarify some details about our family situation. My heart sank. She called Ryan? He told her everything, about the wedding fund, about Mom and Dad's reasoning, about my refusal to return the money. Mrs. Morrison told Bradley that his family doesn't associate with people who steal from their own children. The Morrison family's rejection was swift and brutal. Bradley, caught between his family's disapproval and his fiancé's complicated situation, was starting to question whether Sarah was the kind of person he wanted to marry. "Jessica," Sarah continued, her voice breaking, "I think I'm losing everything. Bradley's parents want him to call off the wedding. The venue is demanding more money we don't have, and I'm starting to think they might be right about me." The admission that would finally force Sarah to confront what kind of person she'd become. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, maybe I am the kind of person who steals from her sister. Maybe I have been prioritizing my social status over my family relationships. Maybe Mrs. Morrison is right to think I'm not good enough for her son." It was the first time I'd ever heard Sarah question herself, the first crack in the perfect facade she'd maintained for years. "Sarah, what do you want me to say?" "I want you to tell me how to fix this. I want you to help me save my wedding and my relationship and my reputation." "Why would I do that?" The question hung in the air for a long moment. "Because we're sisters," Sarah said finally, her voice small. "Because despite everything, I love you, and I know I messed up." The moment when I had to decide whether family loyalty trumped justice. I thought about everything that had led to this moment, the years of being treated as second best, the casual dismissal of my achievements, the theft of my wedding fund justified by claims that I deserved less than Sarah. But I also thought about the sister I'd grown up with, before competition and favoritism had poisoned our relationship. The sister who'd helped me with homework and shared secrets and dreamed about our future weddings when we were kids. "Sarah," I said carefully, "I'll help you, but not the way you think." "What do you mean?" "I mean I'll help you figure out what kind of person you want to be going forward, but I won't help you maintain the lie that taking my money was acceptable." "So you won't talk to Bradley's parents? You won't tell them it was a misunderstanding?" "No, because it wasn't a misunderstanding. You made a choice to prioritize your social status over your sister's happiness. If that choice has consequences, they're consequences you need to face." The tough love that Sarah needed to hear, even if it wasn't what she wanted. "But Jessica, without Bradley's family money and with the venue price increase, I can't afford the wedding I planned. I'll have to scale everything back dramatically." "Then scale it back. Have the wedding you can afford instead of the wedding you think you deserve." "But what will people think?" "The right people will think you're getting married to someone you love, and that's what matters. The wrong people will judge you based on how much you spend, and their opinions aren't worth having anyway." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Is this how you felt when Mom and Dad took your money? Like everything you'd planned was falling apart?" "Yes," I said honestly, "except I didn't have anyone to call for help. I just had to figure out how to be happy with less." "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "I'm really, truly sorry. Not because my wedding is falling apart, but because I hurt you, and I convinced myself it was justified." The apology I'd been waiting years to hear, finally coming at the moment when Sarah had lost everything she thought mattered. "Sarah, do you want some advice? Please. Stop trying to save face. Stop trying to maintain appearances. Tell Bradley the truth about everything, the favoritism, the money, the mistakes you've made. If he loves you, he'll work through it with you. If he doesn't, then he wasn't the right person anyway. And if his family doesn't approve, then you'll learn to build a life that doesn't depend on other people's approval. Trust me, it's actually pretty liberating." 2 weeks later, I received an invitation that would test whether Sarah had truly learned from her mistakes. The envelope was simple cream cardstock, hand-addressed in Sarah's neat script. Inside was an invitation to her wedding, not the elaborate affair she'd originally planned, but a simple ceremony at the community center downtown. The reception was potluck style, with guests invited to bring dishes to share. The flowers were from Mom's garden. Sarah's dress was the same one she'd worn to her college graduation, altered to fit better. At the bottom of the invitation, in Sarah's handwriting, was a note. "Jessica, I know I don't deserve your presence at my wedding, but I hope you'll consider coming anyway. I want to start my marriage by showing my family what really matters, love, not luxury." The wedding that would prove Sarah had finally understood what truly mattered. Ryan and I attended the wedding, bringing a beautiful flower arrangement and our genuine hopes for Sarah's happiness. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, with Bradley looking at Sarah like she was the only person in the world. During the reception, Sarah pulled me aside. "Thank you for coming," she said, "and thank you for not helping me save a wedding that was built on lies and stolen money. How are things with Bradley's family?" "They're coming around, slowly. Mrs. Morrison said she respects the fact that I faced the consequences of my actions instead of trying to cover them up. And Bradley said he fell in love with me, not my wedding budget." The growth that proved people can change when they face real consequences for their actions. "I have something for you," Sarah continued, pulling an envelope from her purse. Inside was a check for $8,500, the remaining balance from my wedding fund. "Sarah, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do. This money was never mine. I should have returned it the moment I realized what I'd done." "What about your vendor deposits?" Sarah smiled sadly. "I lost them when I had to cancel everything. $1,500 was a cheap price to pay for learning who I really want to be." If this incredible story of justice, family, and redemption has kept you glued to the screen, absolutely destroy that like button and subscribe for more amazing stories of people who learn that doing the right thing is worth more than any amount of money. As we left Sarah's modest but genuine wedding celebration, Ryan took my hand. "How do you feel about your family now?" he asked. I considered the question. "I feel like we're finally starting to be honest with each other. That's more valuable than the money ever was." "And your parents?" "They're learning, slowly. Dad actually apologized last week, not because he found out you have money, but because he realized he'd been treating his daughters unequally for years." "That's progress." "It is. And Sarah, I think she's going to be okay. Maybe better than okay. She's learning to value substance over surface, which is something she's never had to do before." The happy ending that proved sometimes the best revenge is watching people become better versions of themselves. 6 months later, Ryan and I had our own wedding at Chateau Margaux Vineyards. It was everything we'd dreamed of, elegant, intimate, and filled with people who celebrated our love unconditionally. Sarah and Bradley came, bringing a handmade photo album of family memories as their gift. My parents were there too, having spent months in family therapy, learning to recognize and address their favoritism patterns. But the most meaningful moment came during the reception when Sarah stood to make a toast. "To my sister Jessica," she said, her voice clear and confident, "who taught me that the most important thing you can have in life isn't money, status, or other people's approval. It's the integrity to do the right thing, even when it's difficult." She raised her glass. "Jessica, You deserved better from our family for years, and I'm sorry it took losing everything I thought mattered for me to realize what actually does. Thank you for loving me enough to let me face the consequences of my choices instead of rescuing me from them." The toast that proved Sarah had truly transformed from entitled golden child to grateful sister. As the evening wound down, Ryan pulled me onto the dance floor for our last dance as newlyweds. "Any regrets?" he asked. I looked around at our celebration, at my parents, who were finally learning to treat their daughters equally, at Sarah, who had discovered her authentic self, at Ryan, who had shown my family what unconditional love actually looked like. "No regrets," I said. "Sometimes the best thing that can happen to a family is having their dysfunction exposed and being forced to deal with it honestly, even if it means some relationships never fully recover. Especially then, because the relationships that do survive become real instead of performative. The wisdom that came from learning the difference between family obligation and genuine love. Today, Ryan and I run a foundation that provides support for young people who've been rejected by their families for failing to meet impossible standards." Sarah volunteers with us regularly, using her experience to help other golden children understand the cost of favoritism. My parents attend family therapy sessions and work actively to treat their daughters equitably. It's not perfect, but it's honest, and that's more than we had before. Because sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't your money or your approval. It's the opportunity to become the person they're capable of being. And sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying the people who wronged you. It's building something so beautiful and authentic that their shallow values become obviously meaningless in comparison. That's what real success looks like. Not the wedding fund, not the chateau venue, not even the happy ending. The real success is a family that finally learned to love each other for who they actually are instead of who they think each other should be. The week after our conversation, Sarah's world began to unravel in ways that were both predictable and shocking. I watched from a distance as the consequences of years of entitled behavior finally caught up with her. But what I discovered about the Morrison family would prove that sometimes the universe has its own sense of justice. It started with a phone call from Mom on Thursday morning. Her voice was strained, carrying the weight of someone who'd finally realized the magnitude of what our family had done. "Jessica, we need to talk about Sarah. Something's happened with Bradley's family, and it's worse than we thought." "What kind of worse?" "The kind where they're not just questioning the wedding. They're questioning everything about our family, and they've hired a private investigator." The revelation that would expose secrets none of us had seen coming. I met Mom at a coffee shop downtown, the same place where Ryan and I had had our first real conversation about his business. She looked older than I remembered, like the stress of recent events had aged her years in just days. "Mom, what exactly did the Morrisons discover?" She pulled out a manila folder, her hands shaking slightly. "Jessica, the private investigator they hired didn't just look into Sarah. They looked into our entire family. They found things I didn't even know about your father." The folder contained financial documents, credit reports, and what appeared to be gambling records dating back 5 years. As I read through them, a picture emerged that made my stomach turn. "Dad's been gambling?" I asked. "Worse than gambling. He's been losing, systematically, for years." Mom's voice was barely above a whisper. "Jessica, the reason we gave Sarah your wedding fund wasn't really about her deserving it more. We gave it to her because we literally couldn't afford to give it to you." The truth about our family's financial situation would explain everything and make it so much worse. "What do you mean you couldn't afford it?" "Your father has lost over $60,000 in the last 2 years. Online poker, sports betting, casino trips he claimed were business conferences. We're not just struggling, Jessica. We're broke." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "So when you gave Sarah my fund..." "We were hoping Bradley's family money would solve our problems. We thought if Sarah married into wealth, They might help us stabilize our finances. You were using Sarah to bail out Dad's gambling addiction? Mom nodded, tears starting to flow. And we convinced ourselves it was about her deserving a nice wedding. We convinced ourselves you'd be fine because Ryan seemed successful, even though we didn't know how successful. The admission that my parents had been lying to themselves as much as to me. Mom, does Sarah know about Dad's gambling? She knows now. The Morrison family confronted her with all the evidence yesterday. They accused her of being part of a scheme to defraud them financially. I felt a stab of sympathy for Sarah despite everything. She had no idea about Dad's situation? None. She thought the wedding fund transfer was exactly what we told her, a decision based on merit and responsibility. Now she's learning that she was essentially being pimped out to solve Dad's financial problems. The crude but accurate description made us both wince. What's Sarah's reaction? She's devastated. She feels like we used her, manipulated her into thinking she was the golden child, when really she was just the more useful child. The moment when Sarah would finally understand that she'd been a victim of our parents' manipulation, too. My phone rang as Mom and I sat in silence, processing this information. It was Sarah, and her voice was different, smaller, more vulnerable than I'd ever heard it. Jessica, I need to see you, please. There's something else, something the Morrisons discovered that you need to know. We met at my apartment an hour later. Sarah looked terrible, exhausted, hollow-eyed, like someone who'd discovered that her entire life was built on lies. Jessica, I owe you an apology that's so much bigger than I realized, she began. Sarah, Mom told me about Dad's gambling. I know you didn't know. It's not just the gambling. Sarah pulled out her own folder of documents. The Morrisons' investigator found something else, something about my job at Henderson Global. I looked at the papers she handed me, trying to make sense of the corporate documents and financial statements. Sarah, I don't understand what I'm looking at. I've been lying about my position at Henderson Global. I'm not a marketing director. I'm a junior marketing coordinator. I make $38,000 a year, not the $75,000 I've been claiming. The revelation that Sarah's entire identity as the successful daughter was as much a lie as everything else. You've been lying about your salary? For 2 years, ever since I got the job, I was so desperate to be the daughter who was making it, who was proving Mom and Dad right for choosing me over you. I inflated everything, my title, my salary, my responsibilities. The scope of the deception was staggering. Sarah, how did you afford your lifestyle if you were only making $38,000? Credit cards, loans. I'm about $40,000 in debt just from trying to maintain the image of success. Sarah's perfect life was even more of a facade than I'd realized. She wasn't just entitled and favored. She was desperately insecure and drowning in debt while pretending to be successful. The Morrison family found all of this, she continued. My real salary, my debt, Dad's gambling, the real reason for the wedding fund transfer. They think our entire family is a collection of frauds and gold diggers. What happened next would prove that sometimes the truth is more devastating than any revenge could be. Sarah, what did Bradley say when he found out? That's the worst part. Bradley defended me. He said he didn't care about the money or the lies, that he loved me regardless of my financial situation or my family's problems. That sounds like a good thing. It was, until his family gave him an ultimatum. They said if he marries me, they'll cut him off financially and professionally. His trust fund, his job at the family firm, his inheritance, all of it goes away if he chooses me. The Morrison family's response was brutal but understandable. From their perspective, they'd discovered that Bradley was marrying into a family of liars and gambling addicts who were using their daughter to solve their financial problems. What's Bradley going to do? I told him to choose his family, Sarah said, her voice breaking. I released him from our engagement. The sacrifice that would prove Sarah was finally growing into a decent person. You ended the engagement? I couldn't let him destroy his life for me. Not when I'm the one who's been lying about everything. Jessica, Bradley is a good man who fell in love with a person who doesn't actually exist. For the first time in our adult lives, I felt genuine respect for Sarah. She was finally putting someone else's well-being ahead of her own desires. How are you handling all this? I'm not really. I lost my fiancé. I'm drowning in debt. Our parents have been lying to me about using me to solve their financial problems, and I've spent 2 years lying about my own success. I don't even know who I really am anymore. The complete breakdown that would force Sarah to rebuild herself from scratch. Sarah, what are you going to do now? I don't know. I can't afford my apartment on my real salary. I can't pay my credit card debt. I can't face my friends knowing they'll find out about all the lies. I feel like my entire life has been a performance, and the show is finally over. I looked at my sister, this woman who'd been handed every advantage I'd been denied, only to squander it all on maintaining false appearances. Despite everything she'd done to me, I felt genuinely sorry for her. Sarah, can I ask you something? Anything. When you were lying about your salary and your success, did you ever think about the fact that you were getting praised for achievements you hadn't actually earned? Sarah considered the question carefully. I think I convinced myself that I deserved the praise anyway, that I was capable of those achievements, even if I hadn't reached them yet. The insight that would help Sarah understand how our family's dysfunction had damaged both of us. Do you see how that's similar to what our parents did with the wedding fund? They convinced themselves you deserved it more, regardless of their actual reasons for giving it to you? Sarah's face went pale as the parallel hit her. Oh God, I've been doing the same thing they were doing, living in a fantasy where my desires justified my actions. Sarah, our parents' favoritism didn't just hurt me. It hurt you too. It taught you that you were entitled to things you hadn't earned, and it set you up for a lifetime of trying to maintain impossible standards. I never thought about it that way, because you were getting the benefits. But those benefits came with a cost. You never learned how to value real achievement over fake success. The conversation that would finally make Sarah understand what our family's dynamics had cost everyone. We talked for 3 hours that afternoon, and for the first time in our adult lives, we had a completely honest conversation. Sarah talked about the pressure she'd felt to be perfect, the fear of disappointing people, the way she'd gotten addicted to external validation. I talked about the loneliness of being the family disappointment, the drive to prove myself that had ultimately led to real success, and the way I'd learned to value my own opinion more than other people's approval. Jessica, Sarah said as our conversation wound down, I want to ask you something, but I'm afraid of what you'll say. Ask anyway. Would you be willing to help me figure out how to rebuild my life honestly? Not financially, she added quickly. I don't want your money or Ryan's money, but maybe advice, guidance on how to build something real instead of just maintaining appearances. The request that would test whether I could separate Sarah's past behavior from her potential for growth. I thought about it carefully. Sarah had spent years treating me as lesser, taking opportunities that should have been mine, and benefiting from our parents' favoritism. But she was also sitting in my living room, having lost everything, asking for help not to maintain her lies, but to live authentically. Sarah, I'll help you on one condition. Anything. No more lies, not to me, not to anyone else, not to yourself. Complete honesty about your situation, your goals, and your mistakes. Can you do that? Yes, Sarah said without hesitation. I'm tired of lying. I'm tired of pretending. I want to build a life I don't have to fake. If this incredible transformation has you completely hooked, smash that like button and subscribe, because what happens when Sarah starts rebuilding her life from the ground up will restore your faith in people's ability to change. Over the next 6 months, Sarah embarked on the hardest journey of her life, learning to live authentically. She moved into a tiny studio apartment that she could afford on her real salary. She took a second job waitressing on weekends to pay down her debt. She started therapy to understand how she'd become so dependent on external validation. Most importantly, she began building genuine skills and achievements instead of fake ones. She enrolled in night classes to improve her marketing expertise. She volunteered with nonprofit organizations to gain real experience. She stopped inflating her accomplishments and started working toward goals she could actually achieve. The transformation wasn't easy or quick. There were setbacks, moments when the temptation to lie or exaggerate was overwhelming. But Sarah stuck with it, and slowly she began to build a life based on truth rather than fiction. What happened when Bradley reached out 6 months later would test how much Sarah had really changed. The text message came on a Tuesday evening. "Sarah, this is Bradley. I know I have no right to contact you, but I need to tell you something. Can we meet for coffee?" Sarah showed me the message, her hands shaking slightly. "What do you think he wants?" "I have no idea. Do you want to see him?" "Part of me does, but I'm scared that seeing him will make me want to go back to being the person I was when we were together." "What person was that?" "Someone who lied about everything to seem worthy of love." The fear that facing her past would undermine all the progress she'd made. Sarah decided to meet Bradley, but she asked if I would come with her for moral support. We met at a small cafe downtown, and I sat at a nearby table while they talked. I couldn't hear their entire conversation, but I could see Sarah's face as she listened to whatever Bradley was telling her. Her expression cycled through surprise, sadness, and something that looked like relief. After an hour, Bradley left, and Sarah came over to my table, looking emotionally drained. "What did he say?" I asked. "He said he chose me over his family's money," Sarah replied. "He's been cut off from his trust fund and his job at the family firm, just like they threatened. But he said he realized that a family that would make him choose between love and money wasn't a family worth having." "That's actually pretty romantic." "It would be, except I told him no." The decision that would prove Sarah had truly learned to put integrity before personal desire. "You turned him down?" "I told him I couldn't be with someone who was willing to sacrifice his future for the person I pretended to be. I said if he wanted to try again, he needed to get to know the person I actually am, the one with debt and a tiny apartment and a junior coordinator job." "How did he take that?" "He said he wanted to try. But Jessica, I told him we'd have to start completely over. No engagement, no wedding plans, no assumptions based on our previous relationship. If we're going to be together, it has to be based on who we actually are, not who we pretended to be." The maturity in Sarah's response was remarkable. 6 months earlier, she would have jumped at the chance to get Bradley back regardless of the circumstances. "Are you going to date him again?" "Maybe. We're going to start with friendship and see if there's anything real underneath all the lies we built our relationship on." The approach that would determine whether their connection was genuine or just based on mutual deception. A year later, Sarah and Bradley did start dating again, but it was completely different from their first relationship. They split dinner bills, went on modest dates, and talked honestly about their mistakes and their goals. Bradley worked as a financial advisor at a small firm, earning his own way for the first time in his life. Sarah had been promoted to assistant marketing manager and had paid off half her debt. Their second relationship was built on truth instead of fantasy, and it was healthier than their first had ever been. But the most significant change wasn't in Sarah's romantic life. It was in our family dynamics. What happened when Dad finally admitted the scope of his gambling addiction would force our family to confront decades of dysfunction. The intervention happened on a Sunday afternoon in March. Sarah and I had been planning it for weeks, working with a therapist who specialized in addiction and family systems. We decided that Dad's gambling had to be addressed directly, not just as a financial problem, but as the root cause of years of family toxicity. "Dad," I said as we gathered in my parents' living room, "we need to talk about your gambling and how it's affected our entire family." Dad's immediate response was denial. I don't have a gambling problem. I have a temporary cash flow issue. You've lost over $100,000 in 3 years, Sarah said, consulting the financial records we'd compiled. You took Jessica's wedding fund to pay gambling debts, not to give me a nice wedding. That's not true, Dad protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Dad, I said gently, we have the evidence. Bank statements, credit card bills, records from online gambling sites. This isn't about blame anymore. This is about getting help and rebuilding trust. The moment when Dad would finally face the reality of how his addiction had poisoned our family. The conversation lasted 4 hours. Dad cried, admitting that he'd been gambling compulsively since I was in high school. He talked about the shame, the way he'd justified increasingly desperate behavior, the lies he'd told himself about being able to win back what he'd lost. Mom talked about the enabling she'd done, the way she'd helped cover up the financial problems, the years she'd spent pretending our family was normal while knowing it was falling apart. Sarah and I talked about how the favoritism and financial manipulation had damaged our relationship with each other and with our parents. By the end of the afternoon, we'd made a plan. Dad would enter a residential gambling addiction program. Mom would attend Al-Anon meetings for families of addicts. We would all participate in family therapy to address the patterns of dysfunction that had developed over years. The beginning of real healing that would require everyone to change, not just Dad. The process wasn't easy. Dad relapsed twice during his first year in recovery, each time triggering family crises that tested our commitment to healing. Mom struggled to stop enabling behavior she'd practiced for years. Sarah and I had to learn new ways of relating to each other that weren't based on competition and resentment. But slowly, painfully, our family began to function in healthier ways. 2 years after Dad entered recovery, we had our first genuinely enjoyable family dinner in over a decade. No one lied about their achievements. No one competed for attention. We just talked, laughed, and enjoyed each other's company. You know, Dad said as we cleared the dishes. I think this is the first time I've been proud of our family for the right reasons. What do you mean? I asked. I mean, I'm proud of how we've all grown, how we've faced our problems honestly, how we've learned to love each other authentically instead of conditionally. The pride that was finally based on real achievements instead of false appearances. Sarah, who had been quiet during most of dinner, spoke up. Dad, can I say something? Of course. I forgive you for the gambling and the manipulation, but more than that, I'm grateful for it. We all stared at her in surprise. I'm grateful because losing everything forced me to build something real. If I'd married Bradley the first time with all our lies intact, I would have spent my entire life being fake. The crisis showed me who I really was and gave me the chance to become someone better. The wisdom that sometimes the worst things that happen to us create opportunities for the best growth. Sarah, I said, that's the most mature thing I've ever heard you say. I learned it from you, she replied. You showed me that being rejected by people who don't value your authentic self isn't a punishment. It's freedom to find people who do. As we finished cleaning up that evening, I reflected on how dramatically our family had changed. We'd gone from a system based on lies, favoritism, and financial manipulation to one based on honesty, equality, and mutual support. 3 years later, our family gathered for another wedding, but this time, everything was different. Sarah and Bradley's second engagement was quiet, practical, and genuine. They'd been dating for 2 years, living together for 6 months, and building a relationship based on shared values rather than social expectations. The wedding was small, held in our parents' backyard with flowers from Mom's garden and food prepared by family and friends. Sarah wore a simple dress she'd bought herself with money she'd saved from her marketing manager's salary. Bradley wore a suit from Men's Warehouse and looked happier than I'd ever seen him. But the most meaningful moment wasn't during the ceremony. It was during the reception when Sarah pulled me aside for a private conversation. Jessica, I have something for you, she said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a check for $10,000. Sarah, what is this? It's your original wedding fund with 3 years of interest. I know Ryan paid for your wedding and you don't need the money, but it was never about need. It was about keeping a promise that should have been kept years ago. The gesture that proved Sarah had finally learned the difference between want and deserve. Sarah, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Not for you, for me. I need to know that I'm the kind of person who keeps promises and corrects past mistakes, even when it's expensive and inconvenient. I looked at the check, then at my sister, who had transformed from an entitled golden child into a woman of genuine integrity. What should I do with it? I asked. Whatever you want. Donate it, save it, spend it on something frivolous. The point isn't what you do with the money. The point is that it's yours, like it always should have been. The moment when I realized that true justice isn't about punishment, it's about people becoming who they're capable of being. As I watched Sarah and Bradley dance their first dance as husband and wife, I thought about the journey our family had taken. We'd gone from dysfunction to crisis to slow, painful healing. None of us were the same people we'd been 3 years earlier. Dad was 2 years sober from gambling, working as a bookkeeper and attending GA meetings twice a week. Mom had learned to stop enabling and started pursuing her own interests for the first time in decades. Sarah had built a career based on real skills and a relationship based on authentic connection. And I had learned that the most powerful revenge isn't destroying people who wrong you. It's creating space for them to become better than they were when they hurt you. If this incredible journey of family dysfunction, personal growth, and ultimate redemption has kept you riveted from start to finish, absolutely demolish that like button and subscribe for more amazing stories of people who turn their pain into growth. Comment below about which moment hit you hardest, because everyone deserves the chance to become the best version of themselves, even if it takes losing everything to get there. Ryan found me later that evening, standing on my parents' back porch and looking out at the party. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Just thinking about how different things are now compared to 3 years ago." "Better?" "Much better. More honest, more real, more family-like, I guess." "Do you ever regret how everything played out? The crisis, the confrontation, all the pain everyone went through?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I said finally, because the alternative was a lifetime of dysfunction disguised as normalcy. This way, we got to learn who we really were and who we were capable of becoming. The realization that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable people's worst impulses. "Your sister seems genuinely happy," Ryan observed. "She is. For the first time in her life, she's happy with who she actually is instead of who she's pretending to be." "And your parents?" "They're learning, slowly, but they're putting in the work, which is more than I ever expected." We stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching our transformed family celebrate a wedding built on truth instead of lies. "Ryan," I said eventually, "thank you for standing up to them that day, for forcing the truth into the open." "I didn't force anything," he replied. "I just stopped pretending their behavior was acceptable." Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in other people's dysfunction. The lesson that boundaries aren't walls, they're foundations for healthier relationships. Today, 5 years later, our family has become something none of us could have imagined during those early years of lies and favoritism. We gather regularly for dinners where everyone's achievements are celebrated equally. We support each other through challenges without keeping score of who deserves what. Sarah runs her own marketing consultancy now, building her business through genuine skill and honest relationships. Bradley works alongside her, having discovered that earning his own success is more satisfying than inheriting it. Dad celebrates 6 years of gambling sobriety next month. Mom has gone back to school to become a counselor for families dealing with addiction. And I've learned that the opposite of favoritism isn't revenge, it's equal treatment, honest communication, and love that doesn't depend on performance. Because sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone isn't what they want, It's what they need to become who they're meant to be. The girl who was denied her wedding fund grew up to understand that the money was never really the point. The point was learning that her worth wasn't determined by other people's financial decisions. And sometimes the most beautiful wedding gift isn't what you receive. It's watching the people who once underestimated you finally become worthy of your love.